Hello, rock stars. I wanted to interrupt before we start this podcast by giving you a special announcement because there's a very, very cool event coming up this week, and I wanted to tell you about it quickly. So I'm actually joining you right now on my iPhone from a hotel room. I'm on a soccer trip with my daughter, but I've got an announcement I wanted to tell you about, and I wanted to make sure I got it onto this episode so you could know about it before this week coming up. So my guess is that you're dealing with many of the same issues that most people do with their mixes. You know, things like maybe you can't get the vocal balance right, maybe your mix sounds really wimpy, maybe you just can't really hear the bass on small speakers, or you can't get enough of the low-end body in your mix that you really want to get. The good news is that all these problems can easily be fixed, and that's what my friend Bobby Osinski is going to help you with in his upcoming Awesome Mix workshop happening this week. Now, Bobby has been a guest on the podcast multiple times. He's one of the greatest teachers in this space that I know, and so you can learn a ton of stuff from him. If you don't know Bobby already, he's the one who literally wrote the book on mixing. His number one best-selling Mix Engineer's Handbook has been the go-to textbook in music production courses in colleges all over the world for the past 20 years. He's literally written like 25 different books. He's also been an on-air audio expert for Forbes, ABC, and CNN, recently mixed the number 2 album on the Billboard Blues chart and number 5 on the Apple Music Rock chart. So Bobby knows what he's doing. He's interviewed so many top engineers himself and practiced it that he has an incredible collection of amazing mix tips for you and solutions to mixing problems. So his upcoming Awesome Mix workshop is going to be addressing all these problems with easy-to-use fixes that you can use right away on your next mix. It's a free 3-day live event, and it starts on Monday, December 4th at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. So you definitely want to register for this thing now. Get your name in there. It's going to fill up quickly, but it's free, so check it out. All right, so what I recommend you do is scroll down, click through, register for this so you don't forget, and then come back here and listen to the rest of this episode with Sam Sherbin. You're going to love this one. Cheers. This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Isotope, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Lewitt, Spectra 1964, and OWC. You're hearing my voice right now on the Lewitt Pure Tube microphone through the Spectra 1964 STX 100D mic pre and C610 complementer mixed with Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the link in the show notes. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
I mean, you could do so much with just EQ. I mean, you take 7K out. Oh my God, this song sounds different. You could filter the band, filter the whole record. You could, take 1K out and see what that sounds like. It's amazing to know what we could do with just the basic tools in front of us. It's panning, EQ, and compression.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. My studio is proudly powered by OWC, and I love how it's improved my workflow. OWC can connect all your audio work drives, trackballs, mix controllers, MIDI keyboards, audio interfaces, displays, or cameras so that you can work fast and focus on making your best record ever. Go look at the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, or Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at maxsales.com/rockstars to find the perfect solution for your studio from OWC. And thanks for using our custom link in the show notes. Howdy, rock stars. I've got a secret to tell you about how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of recording studio rock stars. My secret is using Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar to make this podcast sound great. Right now, you're hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Go to isotope.com and use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Howdy, rock stars. It's your host, Lyd Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, the podcast bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Sam Sherbin, a mixing engineer based in Los Angeles, California. First cutting his teeth at various studios in New York City, he went on to develop his skills under the mentorship of the late, great Bruce Swedien at his home studio in Florida. Since then, Sam has scored cuts with international stars like CL, Stray Kids, Rachel Platten, Ebony Obsidian, and many more. He collaborates closely with the likes of multi-platinum producer and composer Nick Lee, expanding Sam's footprint in both music and network television shows like NBC's Grand Crew. Now, I ran into Sam back at NAMM in 2022, actually, and we had talked about doing a podcast interview, and so I was happy recently to see that we hadn't scheduled that yet, and so we went ahead and did that. And I'm excited to dive in with Sam into learning more about mixing, and particularly mixing pop and bass music, which Sam is really great at. Knowing how to get the low end just right in your mix is crucial, whether you're mixing 808 kick drums and sub bass, or just getting a rock band to sound great. And Sam clearly knows how to get the low end to sound awesome. So please welcome Sam Sherbin to Recording Studio Rockstars. Sam, my friend, are you ready to rock, dude?
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, dude. Good to see you again. And, I guess when we were there at NAMM in 2022, that was sort of the first time it was sort of back in action after taking a break for a year or two. And it was a little bit quiet, but it was really fun to just be back around everybody and reconnecting with everybody. How have you been since then, man?
I think I've been really good. I think it's a time frame where people had to adjust, right? They had to adjust to the new norm of living, but then they had to adjust to a different way of working, in the sense that maybe more musicians had to learn how to record. I heard a lot of indie artists picking up Pro Tools for the first time and learning how to record their own vocals because they couldn't get into a studio.
Yeah.
So I just think it empowered people to be very creative on, was this going to stop everyone from being creative, or were we going to just adjust and find a new way of still making music? Music was being streamed and other content was being made. TV shows were being made. So it didn't really stop anything, but people had to just adjust. And
yeah, like
I'm happy that people are
we all
back.
woodshedded, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to steal a little jazz term right there, but like we all just went into our studios. It's funny you talk about being people being really creative. I think people were also just being bold, because I think there were a lot of people who really were scared shitless to go learn how to actually set up a mic and record themselves. Some of the artists.
Yeah, super scary, especially when you have a great recording engineer that you've been working with and everything seems seamless. And then once you get behind the mic yourself, you're like, oh, this is a very technical and you have to be very precise job of recording. Recording is an art form, and I think it's been lost in the digital age. That everyone, obviously they talk about mixing and mastering and glorify things, but I think recording is a lost art. And learning from greats who recorded very well, like Al Schmidt was a master recording engineer. Like, he could record an entire orchestra, you pull up the faders and it sounded like a record. The tools that we have now, people think we could fix everything, and we can fix a lot, but everything starts with a great recording.
Yeah. So now, did you find yourself coaching a lot of artists on how to set up their mic and record themselves well so they could, record their vocals and send them over to you, sort of thing?
Yes, I think sometimes yes, but a lot with producers are like, oh wow, now I have to record the artist that I'm working with, because sometimes the artist will just come to the studio. But a lot of more like gear suggestions, like what mic should I get? What headphones should I get? What monitor should I get?
Yeah.
Those kind of things, like I'm going to spend a lot of money. What's the best purchasing option for my budget? That sort of thing.
Yeah, and you're like, get something that works.
Yeah, get something that works, and don't overthink too much about what you should get. You should just start. I think it's more important to start than to figure out what you like, versus me telling you to go buy a C100G for $20,000.
Yeah.
That may not be the best mic for you.
The Sony C800, is that what you said?
Yeah, C100G. Well, that might go for like 20,000 now.
Wow. And that's the one that has like the crazy like heat fins on the back.
Yeah, the heat fan. Yeah.
That's wild. I've never used one of those. What do they sound like?
They're very bright. A lot of big pop vocalists use that microphone. The clarity on it is just unreal, but at the same time, good mic technique helps with that. Mouth noises and clicks and sibilance can get very hot with that microphone. But if you tweak it, it sounds like $1 million. So.
Yeah, I bet Isotope is your best friend when you're getting ready to mix a vocal recorded on that.
Isotope is my best friend with all microphones at RX. I can't believe how beyond useful that tool is.
Yeah.
It's just every little thing that you could think of, RX can pretty much handle. It's amazing.
What are some examples for you of how you might use RX as you get ready to mix a track?
Oh, that's a great question. First, I listen to the vocal. I don't RX something without listening to it. So I listen to the vocal first. I listen to the background vocals, and then I go to Audio Suite, and I open all the modules that I need: depulsive, de-essing, declipping. Use those, and then you take the target off the red dot so that you can have all of them open at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just highlight and I just work on each section. I go and I manually de-ess. With the breaths, I have gain, and I have different gain points, like -2 dB, -4. So with the breaths, I just highlight it, -4, boom, that goes down 4 dB.
Now this is in the RX app, or this is in Pro Tools still?
This is in Pro Tools. This is in the Audio Suite. When you just Audio Suite and you just edit the vocal, that's how I do it. I know some people send to RX and then they do all the work and then they send it back to Pro Tools. But I'm just faster on Audio Suite.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's gonna end up in Pro Tools and you could just stay there, you might as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I really have a lot of fun editing stuff over in RX. At times, I'm not using it every day like that. So therefore, when I go over, I sort of have to relearn a little bit of the navigation stuff. But it is pretty remarkable how granular you can get when you get in there and you start addressing a particular, plosive or sound or S. And you're like, oh, I'll de-ess it. Oh, I'll just de-ess the lower frequencies, stuff like that. It's really
it's incredible. It's an incredible tool. I mean, it helps things that are maybe unsalvageable or just like bass parts that are kind of a little clicky. You can go through that. I do that as well. Any kind of instrument thing that may have a little bit of an issue, I might just go in there. But I go in there with the problem at hand. I don't RX the whole thing. I'm like, if I hear it, I fix it. If I don't hear it, I move on with my day.
Yeah, right.
And keep working on the record.
It's interesting that you said bass parts that are clicky. So describe that to us a little bit. Like what's a sample or an example of that?
Maybe someone's playing a lot of definitely like rhythmic notes, and then they're playing the next note, and then sometimes it can just be very clicky to transient. So it could sound like a click, and then you kind of declick that, and then you can hear the note
And that's on
past the
an
transient.
actual
Yeah,
like a
like a live bass,
electric guitar bass. Yeah.
Yeah, on synthesized bass, you wouldn't hear that. It would just be the notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of a rare thing. I think I've done that maybe once, but yeah, it's good for that.
Well, I talk about this at times, or I have on some of the ads that I've done for Isotope using RX. I talk about, I've taken valve notes, the clacking of valves out of a cornet solo where it was like,
wow,
you could really hear it. And I was like, oh, well, let me just pull up RX. And I literally went in and like removed, I didn't remove them. I just toned down all the valve click, 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 clickety clacks, and it sounded awesome like that. And then there was another time where I was working with an artist and he had recorded an actual vocal choir and, with just maybe a handful of mics or something, or even just stereo mics. And he brought it in and he was pointing out how you could hear like people shuffling their papers or shuffling their feet on the bleachers of this big choir ensemble. And it was like, can you take that out? And I was like, well, we'll try it. And sure enough, I was able to go in there and find the foot shuffles or the paper rustles and just like draw them out and remove it. It was pretty amazing how well that worked.
Yeah, it's beyond amazing. I mean, things like background noise or someone's fan going off or AC going off, it's just a godsend.
Yeah. I almost wish that I had more bird chirps by accident because it would be so easy to see those in RX and just like, boop, take it right out of the recording.
Yeah, that's great.
Or a truck driving by outside. That's probably one you could do.
Yeah. I had that once happen on my podcast with Joey Reyes. He's the mixer for Run the Jewels, and I was doing a podcast recording, and the ice cream truck went by, and I was like, I can't get this out of the recording. He's like, keep it. He's like, keep it on the podcast. So my podcast with Joey Reyes has the ice cream truck on it. I think we named his episode after the ice cream truck. It was funny.
Oh, that's awesome. Great. Tell us about your podcast. I don't think I mentioned that in the intro. My apologies.
Yeah, I forgot to mention it myself. I forgot I had a podcast. I had a one season podcast called In the Zone, talking to other mixers about their come ups in the industry and also kind of the day-to-day, like what did you do to get you where you are now? Because I think some podcasts focus on just people's success or techniques or things like that. I'm like, well, what did you do when you were a runner making no money? How did you survive?
Yeah.
Like, what was the thought process in continuing a career where you're not making a lot of money and you have to go home to your family and people are asking what you're doing? So,
wait, are you saying that it's hard to live on no money in Los Angeles?
Yes. So yeah, I did one season. My first episode was with Stuart White, who's Beyonce's recording engineer and mixer, good friend of mine. I had David Kim on there, who's also another Grammy Award winner for Nas, Joey Reyes, Ryan Gilligan. I'm forgetting. That's so many amazing producer, Richie Beretta. A lot of cool friends on there. Another great mixer named Eric Madrid, worked a lot with Khalid and artist named Kyle. And yeah, I started it in the pandemic because my friends were had this super mixing group on Instagram with a bunch of high profile mixers, and they were having great conversations. And I was like, hey, why don't I just like put this on a podcast? Because you guys are saying like really remarkable things, and no one outside of this group is like hearing any of these things. So
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. It's called In the Zone.
All right, cool. We'll put a link to that in the show notes so you can check that out.
Yeah.
All right, groovy. So what about, if you were helping people choose some of the right stuff to record themselves, whether this specifically happened or whether it's just something well from other experiences, what kind of stuff have you learned about how somebody should set up to get a great vocal recording in their home studio environment?
Oh yeah, it's good to have isolation. Whether you have one of those like reflection filters, or some people even put up mattresses. As weird as it looks, could help with those early reflections. And it's basically you're trying to get the room sound out of the microphone and try to get it to be clear. And you want to be comfortable. You don't want to have a recording process with a front end with CO1B and a NAMM 1073 going into all these little things. If you're just starting out, an Apollo is just an amazing tool. An Apollo Twin, you get something like a Mojave microphone, and you're good to go for a few $1,000s. And once you learn how to record yourself, it'll change your life as an artist, because then you could record songs as inspiration hits and go back and do edits, and it's very self-empowering.
Yeah.
I think, for artists to be able to record themselves at home, because that's how I started,
That's what you did. Were you recording yourself singing or recording other people singing?
Both. I was more so rapping and producing. That was my start. I started off as an artist producer, mixing my own music by necessity, not by I wasn't thinking, oh, mixing is an occupation. I was like, mixing is something I needed to do to get my songs out. So
yeah.
And I remember other people's music sounding better, and a friend of mine, showed me his microphone that he was using and the recording software, and I started to mix after that point, because I was like, I want my music to sound good. So that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, well, there's something really cool too about, I guess it's really cool to learn how to record mix, no matter what genre of music you're doing. But when you're doing music where the only acoustical element might be the microphone, if there's a bunch of sampled sounds, I feel like it gives you like a little bit of a leg up on getting potentially a really good sound out of your speakers, and like learning how to mix well. Because and we got lots to talk about with that, but if you have Ableton Live and you're generating a sound in that or something like that, you've got like you can generate about as good a sound as exists,
Yeah, it's pretty much flawless.
Yeah, because you've got those pure tones to make samples and synths and bass lines out of and stuff. And that, to me, that gets me really excited just thinking about that stuff. It's fun, but I know there are a lot of challenges with it too. But let me pivot back to one moment about the vocal thing. So you talked about those reflection-free zones, or like, those half shell kind of reflector things that block reflections from getting into the microphone in the room. Have you also found that there's a difference between what might work for somebody who's singing on a mic versus what might work for somebody who's rapping on a mic? Do you sort of want a slightly different environment somehow?
Maybe. I don't really see it as like someone's singing versus someone's rapping. I'm like, well, there's just a human voice, and how do we capture it in the most natural way? Because I think when you can capture it naturally and kind of pure, then you can go in with your mixing and your other effects and be able to manipulate it the way that you want, and not have to worry about the source, signal. Because when I get records to mix, sometimes you could see that someone's clipping the input of the microphone. The sound is being clipped. So it's also knowledge on signal flow, and knowing if you're a singer and you're going to be singing a very high note, you might be clipping the input of the microphone. So when you're singing, you could be singing your highest register, and then kind of adjust your microphone there. Sometimes they have people sing their highest note, or they go into the chorus where they're really opening up, get that leveled, and then everything else is good. Because also with digital workstations, the noise floor is so low, so you can actually record really low and then just gain it up in clip gain, and you won't have all this, noise floor.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing too, is when you're in a higher bit depth, 24, 32 bit, like noise floor is just so insane that you can record really low and just increase the volume.
Yeah, just gain it right up.
Yeah, just gain it right up versus gaining it too high and then your input is clipped and your vocals sound bad. So
yeah, I guess the only place where the gaining it too high thing supposedly might not be a problem. I know that with 32-bit recordings, sometimes you can record it and then you can get the sound back. I don't really understand how that works yet, so that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, I don't know either, but
like even this mix pre from Sound Devices that I'm using now, it records in 32-bit. I think I have it set up that way so that if I accidentally get an over, I can just like clip gain it down. But again, that's all I'll say, because I think when you hear stuff like that in the studio, you know, the engineer in you is like, yeah, but I'm going to have to hear that in an action before I believe it, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of microphone, what mic is that? Is that Telefunken?
No, this one is a Mic Tech PM9. It's a dynamic mic from a local company called Mic Tech. It's a guy, Michael Ketchel, started the company. In fact, he's been around making mics for forever. One of the first mics he made was one of the earliest Samson USB mics. He was the one who came up with that idea.
Wow, I had one of those. I believe I did.
yeah. I mean, it's going back ways. But anyway, he started a company called Mic Tech, and I've just been using the PM9 as my interview mic on the podcast since day one, and just
sounds great.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. And then this is just going into the mix pre for the gain right now, so that's sort of my sound now. What about you? You're on a SM7 or like the USB? Sure,
yeah, the
SM7?
USB one, the MV7. Yeah, it's just I don't, you know, I got this for my podcast, and I was like, I don't do that much recording, but it's cool because it has an output for the headphones. So my headphones is coming out from the microphone, and it's just very it's just a microphone with headphone out, and has a mute, and you can adjust it. Has different like EQ curves on there, and I thought it was cool. I thought it was a good microphone to get.
Well, I love USB mics. I'm less in love with USB mics for recording music in the studio, but I love them for podcast stuff. When you're just doing interviews and stuff, it's just like, man, it's so great to just plug the mic in and go. You know, no fuss.
No fuss at all. Yeah, it's awesome, and it works for what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
podcasting.
Yeah. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you're setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class full-size studio for professional mixing and mastering in stereo or immersive sound. Featuring the XART tweeter and custom DSP onboard processing, the A-series monitors will perfectly adapt to your studio. Get the Atom Audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for you with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Hey rock stars, have you checked out Native Instruments recently? Look, no matter what style of music you make, Native Instruments gives your studio everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to the coolest synths, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I personally love recording and tracking real bands in my studio, but then also adding awesome overdubs from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid Keys, for example. Go pick up Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. All right, so let's see. Let me remember where we also left off and jump forward. Oh, so we were talking about the idea of, being able to create these great sounds and sort of like have the ability to do a really, really high quality mix in our studios, especially if we're working with samples and things like that, where the source sounds are quite pure. What are some thoughts you have about that? So even though I just said that, I think at the same time, it's also just as easy to make crappy sounds doing stuff like that. And it's also great. It's also just as possible for you to be the mixer and have somebody deliver you crappy sounds. So talk a little bit about like that from your perspective, either creating the right sounds or just, making a judgment call as a mixer when the sounds come to you?
Sometimes you might have to lean into it. If the vocal is kind of distorted, everything else is distorted, you might distort it on top of what's already been done to kind of even it out. And mixing, as much as people try to, I guess, make it into a science, I think a lot of it is experimentation and going with your gut and saying, you know what, this sound is a little weird. I'm going to figure it out in a musical context. How does this fit within the music? It might be a bad sound on itself, but if you color around it or if you mix around it, you may be able to make that a focal point. I remember when I went to mix with the masters with Manny Marroquin, and he was always talking about like focal points. Like you can adjust focal points in different ways to get the sound to pop or to kind of like mask it a little bit. So sometimes I like those sounds. Some sounds are like really bad, but they're really cool because they're bad. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
A friend of mine was like, oh, we want to record an upright piano. And they were trying to record it with like a Royer ribbon microphone. I'm like, it'd be cool if you just recorded it with your iPhone. Your iPhone's right there.
Yeah. And the iPhone sounds cool.
And it sounds really cool. You just put it right there next to the piano and recorded it and threw it in the record. Just like threw the file into Logic and it continued producing. Because they were trying to go for a lo-fi vibe anyway. So I was like, why don't we just start there? Royer is really nice too, I'm not going to lie.
No, Royers are great, but I mean, it's true. I think there are a lot of times where we start with a high quality mic because we want high quality mics in our studios, but really what we want creatively is more of a more lo-fi sound to match the mix. And so it's true that we can spend a lot of time actually trying to lo-fi out what started out as a really pure natural sound.
Yeah. And I think, Bruce always told us to go outside and listen to the band. He's like, before you make a decision, go out there and listen to the band, listen to what you're recording, and then choose your microphone. Because he was very famous for using his SM7 on Michael Jackson's Thriller. Mm-hmm. And he actually had that mic. When I was with him, he actually said, hey, here's the mic. And I'm like, oh my God.
Did you immediately touch
talk about microphones. Bruce had every single mic. I think he had over 120 mics, and he had original bags. Like he had a 1954 U47 in the original bag, in the original box.
Wow.
It was unbelievable.
Wow. So that makes me feel a little bit better about those closets full of boxes.
Yes.
Like, I think it's a modern problem that we have where we order stuff and then we get it and we're like, well, I don't want to throw the box away just yet. Like, what if I need it later? And then
what if you need it later? Yeah.
Then 20 years later, you're like, maybe I should just throw those boxes away. So when you say Bruce, do you mind if I call you Bruce? Sorry, a little Monty Python quote there. Tell us more. We're talking about, of course, the great Bruce Swedien, and that SM7, as you pointed out, was what was used to record Michael Jackson. In fact, when I first learned about an SM7, I was on a session and somebody was worried about there being bleed into the vocal mic in that particular setting. And the producer's like, hold it, we need to get an SM7 in here. And we were all like, what's that? And then somebody brought it in and he was like, this is what Michael Jackson sang on.
Oh my God. I think he literally made it super famous after that point. And the most incredible mixing recording engineer that I ever, fortunate enough to know and learn from. And he was an open book. I think that was the other thing. Is like if you had a question, he would answer it.
And you were down in Florida? Was this like Miami or something?
This was in Ocala, I think.
Ocala, okay.
Yeah, and basically, long story short, he had a mixing master class. There's only 10 people in the world get picked. I applied, sent my music, didn't hear anything back for a few months. Got an email from his assistant, Ramses Meechan, and he was like, hey, Bruce personally picked you. He loves your music. When could you get a flight out here? And then my family was freaking out because they thought it was fake. Like, they're like, no way. And then Bruce got on the phone, and his wife got on the phone. They're like, yeah, we love Sam's music, and we love for him to come. And yeah, like they went through like 5,000 applications, like
Wow.
shredded them, and yeah, they wanted to pick a solid group of people to learn from. And I flew out to Florida, 7 days, and also Bernie Grundman was there. So this was insane. So Bernie Grundman was there, Bruce was there, and it was the first time Bernie had went to Bruce's his house, and Bernie brought a bunch of like CDs with him and stuff, and he played us the mix of Billie Jean and then the master after. And I'm like, this is like, no one in the world is better to be like in a room with audio professionals than these two guys. Like, it was insane. Like, we're in Bruce's control room listening to Thriller on Halloween night with Bernie Grundman.
On Halloween night, amazing.
On Halloween night, yeah, we were listening to Thriller and listening to it on his Westlakes, and it's just.
Now, did you guys have the video queued up too, or just go for the music only?
He had the music video up. He had like a home theater too. So like sometimes you'll go in there like, hey, have movies up or whatever. Like he would, there was a lot of things that we did. We also like recorded a lot of bands. We recorded a band, and we also recorded, his daughter is a pianist, so recorded her. That's really how I really learned what mixing is really about. And that's why recording is so important, because he was essentially mixing at the mic. Like his microphone selection was very, very like, I'm going to use XY for this. I'm going to use this microphone with this polar pattern here. And we're going to move the artist back a little bit. And telling his story of like 1950s and not having compressors or EQs and just having like a rotary dial is insane. To think that people like him and Al Schmidt, those generation of engineers, were engineering records on 4 tracks, and making it sound amazing. So it was unbelievable to get that music history lesson from the guy who worked with so many amazing artists.
Now, when you say the rotary dial, I think you're referring to that old school method where all you had was like the big Bakelite knob because there were no compressors yet, right? So if you
there was no faders. It was just like this rotary, like RCA kind of dial, like a mic gain dial, I guess.
But in other words, they were constantly changing it. Like you were bringing up the gain for low vocal things and bringing it down for louder vocal things as you recorded, right?
Yeah, as you recorded. So you're recording, and you had to be ready for all the parts, and that's why he was always intent on like listening to the band first, let them play the song down a bit, and the musicianship was amazing. I remember he told us the story. He recorded Oscar Peterson 3 albums in one night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Riding the gain on Oscar was playing piano, right?
Yeah, piano. So he probably had a trio or something like that. I wouldn't assume that he was like doing that, but he did say that he recorded 3 albums in one night, and guys like that are just like absolute greatest of all time. Yeah, so it was amazing.
Well, it's funny to even think about that concept of and let me reiterate this, rock stars, in case you're trying to picture this. So with the big rotary knobs before faders, it's a continuous knob, so you can bring up the gain more during the quiet section recording to tape, or you can bring down the gain when things get louder, again recording to tape, so that what you're printing on the tape sort of is already adjusted for levels. And then, I don't know if they would do those same kind of things much at the mix, or if they really sort of nailed it in the recording process. But it's funny to think about, let's go back to another mic pre that you brought up, Sam, which is the 1073, which of course has detented gain settings, which like completely would never work for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of do it if you're in between lines, but it's probably because, that probably came around in conjunction with the fact that now they had faders, so that didn't matter in the same way.
Yeah. it's just so important to those details and like how much better we have it now versus then. It's like, oh, if you record a tape and you record something over, oh my God, like if you lost a take, you literally lost a take. A lot of those guys were just very proficient with the tape machines, and he had a very particular way of like recording, and he slaved, I think, multiple 24-track tape machines at the same time, and was mixing like Michael Jackson History album on like a 96 channel SSL. Like this is like hardcore engineering mixing. Like, tracks, like hundreds of tracks bounce down, just like, how George Martin had to do it with the Beatles, just like bounce down and bounce down. And I was in a session with an artist yesterday, and I had my Beatles recording book, and I was just showing her the recording method, like the red. I'm like, they only had like a few faders, and they really worked out the arrangement. George Martin and the Beatles and Jeff Emmerich, like they really worked out the arrangement because they only had so much to work with. And it made them super creative at the same time. I mean, Sgt. Pepper is one of my favorite albums of all time. And just to think that, John Lennon doesn't want to do a double, and they create ADT for him.
Right.
is amazing, because he's like, I don't want to do this. And someone's like, you know what? Why should he do it? Right. Let's figure it out,
Yeah. I guess that sounds a little bit like autotune getting invented.
Yeah.
But, it's funny too, because you think about, okay, now we have all these incredible tools with digital and all this capability. And because there's no noise floor, you can get the gain right later. But what's always cool to be reminded of to me is that you have to realize you're still missing something. So for example, if they were riding the gain and adjusting it during the recording, if people were in headphones anyway, then that means they were actually hearing their gain adjusted in the headphones as part of the process. And, they were hearing that level adjust right away on playback too. And when we think about like, oh, we can just do it later in digital, it's like, yeah, but you're wouldn't it be cool to experiment with that where you're gaining it in real time so that everybody hears that it becomes part of the performance, or, immediately on playback, it's all adjusted so that you hear that on playback. So, because I think sometimes we kick that can down the curb, with digital, we're like, oh, we'll get to it later. Oh, we'll sort it out later kind of stuff.
Yeah. I always love like producers that will just like do their own filters on their synthesizers instead of drawing it in. I'm like, you could just perform that live.
Yeah.
And just work with the oscillators live, VCA circuits live, and then you could have it be a part of the creativity, and just let yourself be free with mistakes, and also like experimentation, and not really getting into like so much repetition where you feel like it's hard to come up with new ideas. Sometimes you have to break rules to be creative and just be like, you know what? Everything that I thought was going to work is not working. So I'm just going to do whatever, and something's going to happen.
Yeah, totally. No, I'm all for breaking rules. I think it's also important that you establish boundaries in creativity, because it's the boundaries that cause you to get creative about how you're going to solve the problem of the boundary,
Yeah.
And having unlimited things doesn't give us that. Even when you were talking about Bruce mixing with 96 tracks on analog, at a certain point, even he might have been like, I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, he really was. He, when we were mixing on his Harrison console, he was like, hey, they're like, do you like plugins? He was like, they're not really my thing, but he said, you guys should use every tool available. I remember him saying that very clearly. He's like, if you want to use plugins, why not? Because that's the new technology.
Yeah.
And I think they just modeled, UAD just had modeled a few years prior his Harrison. He had a Harrison channel strip that they modeled.
Oh, interesting. Have you ever used the Harrison Mix Bus 32 stuff too?
No, I heard great things about that. I actually have their plugins. Their channel 32 is based on the 3232C, and those Harrison filters are amazing. I don't think I've ever heard any filters like that. Like if you filter below 100, it's like that below 100 is like completely gone. And that was how, Bruce was able to carve, they talk about his mixing being immaculate, and it's just amazing. He was using those filters to carve space so that everything could sit. And I'm like, man, these filters are unreal. I've never heard anything like that in my life. I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then when you mix on a console, you're like, this is fun.
Yeah.
It's so much fun to be mixing on a console. I definitely miss it.
Yeah, and one of the things I wish I'd like to be doing more of when it comes to mixing on a console is not even fussing with automation, just committing moves to the 2-mix and then just like edit that together like editing tape,
Yeah.
Such a cool way to make records back then. You just go for a great mix, and then you just, that section sounded great. This section sounds great. Great, let's just stick them together,
Yeah.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound kind of weak or distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding much closer to professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools, and the best part is that these mixing techniques work for you in any DAW, whether you're on Logic, Cubase, Studio One, Reaper, anything you can think of. If you're ready now to make your best record ever, then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Cool. So what about stereo miking? I did hear you mention XY, and I remember hearing that Bruce was sort of famous for wanting to use stereo mics.
Yeah, stereo miking is, he was always trying to talk about the stereo panorama, like the stereo placement of microphones and the sonic field. And he would experiment with those kind of things to just get the clarity and kind of like the staging of those instruments. It's just amazing to see how much you could do with microphones, and even, guys who are using like Decatry for, orchestra. And you're kind of like, I think people see microphones as, they see microphones as things that are, you're capturing something, but you're not just capturing the essence of a sound, you're showcasing the space that it's in.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're kind of putting foreground and background in it at the same time, and it's kind of, you're using your microphones as a tool to place this sound in a certain space. So
it's like that idea of pre-mixing. You're already mixing.
Yeah, you're already mixing at the mic, and I don't record as much anymore, but when I did record, it was a lot of fun to just experiment with different mic placements and things like that, and kind of just figure out how to get the sound that I want in my head. I'm like, sometimes, you know what, this microphone technique sounds cool, but let me just try something weird and see what it sounds like. That's the cool thing about working in music, is like we could think one way based on the technique that's tried and true, that we can just go against the grain and just try something new and just try it. Yeah. It could be totally wrong. It could be out of phase. It could be all sorts of wrong, but it's like, man, this is actually cool, Yeah,
and that's a great way to, especially, it's helpful when you try stuff and you get it wrong, and it's even more helpful if you are in a position to recognize whether it's right or wrong when it happens,
Yeah.
Like phase stuff, like learning when things are in and out of phase and beginning to train your ear to hear what's going on with that can be so ear opening. It's so empowering to start to understand that stuff.
Yeah, like phase coherence and like your overheads, and like once you hear those things and you work with a lot of like live musicians and things are not perfectly in sync, and you start nudging things in phase and flipping phase for certain things, you do get the ear training of like, wow, my recording was great, but this part was a little bit out of phase. Let me flip the phase 180 and see if that helps. Oh, that helps. It's just things like that. Like the modern console, when you think about it, was just a problem solver on a channel strip. The SSL4000 was a bunch of problem solving tools right there. Like you need a low cut, we have a low cut. You need expansion gate, we have a gate here. It's amazing to think that people were thinking long term of like what issues may happen in the recording and try to make a tool that does everything.
Yeah. I'll remind us all that before you had the, we'll fix it at the console kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was like, you perhaps would learn how to recognize phase by just, adding a mic and going like, oh, what just happened to the sound I had? Let's move that other mic. Let's move it to a new spot. All these rules about mic placement. Like, you remember the 3-to-1 rule, which I think said, if a mic is one distance to the instrument you're doing, make sure it's at least 3 distance away from the other instrument that you don't want to be in the mic. And then I don't remember if that was just strictly a stereo panning thing or if that was more just like a phase correlation, but stuff like that is really fascinating to think about for me.
Yeah. When you learn phase and you start messing with imaging like an S1 or MS Imager, and you start cranking it and you hear it out of phase and it's like out of your speakers and the middle disappears, that's good ear training as well. So you're like, whoa, I have this thing that's super out of phase. And if you got some stems and they sound weird and they're out of phase, they're probably out of phase, because you're going to know that from practicing, phase relationships by like, oh, if I stereo widen this thing way too much, it's out of phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good for learning.
And also phase polarity relationships, particularly in low end when things are all getting summed together.
Yeah.
For me, one of the things that was really helpful was, to understand bass, for example, and what's going on with the DI and an amp, for example, was take the DI and just listen to it, and then start bringing up the amp against that and see if you hear anything funny happen in the low end.
Yeah.
And then try that with it flipped. And it's like, does it, those things are really fascinating to hear. And, sometimes it doesn't make the low end go away, but it just sort of changes the character of what's going on with the tones.
Mm-hmm.
That could be really interesting. All right, let's see. What was I going to just ask you? Tell us about your studio. So are you joining us from your studio now where you do most of your mixing? And if so, like what are the tools that you're surrounded by? What's the tools and the stuff that's in your space that makes it so you can make records that sound so good?
Yeah, my space is very, very simple. I had like barefoot MM27s at one point. I had API 2500, 5500, Crane Song Head, rest in peace to Dave Hill, genius. I had all these analog things, and I'm mixing records, and artists would be in LA and I'm in New York, and they'll ask for, mix tweaks, and I had to tweak my mix buses and everything. And I remember when I was assisting in New York, we had this SSL G console. Well, it was a E console with some G parts. It was like a Frankenstein console.
Mm-hmm.
And we had all this analog gear. We had Eventides, we had 10M, atomic clocking, we had a Fairchild, we had all this gear, and then sometimes the gear would just not work.
Yeah.
Literally one day, like our H3000, the LCD screen just blanked, like gone. Like no one knew what setting it was on. It just was blank. And I'm like, oh, this is what people talk about with analog gear.
Yeah.
So basically I went from completely analog to 100% in the box. I was watching a lot of Chad Blake videos. Amazing.
And then you were like, wait a minute, why is the computer not working today? Oh no, it's analog all over again.
Yeah. And then it's like, I was like, well, if Chad Blake can make it work out, and Sherbin, it had been mixing in the box for 20 years, it clearly works.
Yeah.
So what I did was I was like, I'm just going to mix in the box and I'm going to make it work. So I have a Mac trash can. I have a Dangerous Source. I have a Soft Tube Console 1, which I don't use that much anymore. Clarity M loudness meter that's turned off. Has been turned off for I don't know how long. And I have my Ocean Waves Pro 2As, and I have my trusty tube chops, my red tube chops in the corner. And yeah, that's really it. And I have my Audaz's LCDXs, which I love. I love those headphones.
Are those? You don't have the Manny versions yet?
No. I got the. I did test both of them. I tested both of them because I'm an Audaz's artist, and I was checking them both out. But I might get the new ones that they have. They just came out with the new Manny ones.
Yeah,
might get those for travel. And yeah, those LCDXs, I listened to them and I was like, this is great. And that's where I started mix on them and I end the mix on them, and they've been fantastic.
That's very cool. Yeah, so Rockstars, the Audaz headphones, I think they're planar drivers or something, right? They're sort of like a square or a rectangle that's sending the sound to your ears. Do you remember if that's correct? It's not like a cone.
Yeah, I think it's a planar magnetic technology, I think is what they say on the side of them.
Yeah, and they're extremely accurate sounding. I heard them at that same NAMM that well, actually, I think it went back to 2020 NAMM. But anyway, I remember first hearing them and I was like, holy shit, these really, they sound really detailed. And the low end wasn't like booming, but it was very pure sounding.
Yeah. I feel like it's not booming, but you could hear the tone. And I'm like, if I could hear the tone, and I kind of trained my ear to hear different tones on it, kick drums and things like that, and 808s, I'm like, oh, it's going to poke through. And then you just have to reference a lot of material to train your ear to how they respond to low end and how they respond to top end. But the very interesting thing about those headphones were, I remember I was mixing a song and there was like a synth decay that was like slowly decaying out, and it didn't even show on Pro Tools Meter anymore. If you zoomed in, you couldn't even really see the waveform anymore, but you could still hear it on those headphones because they go up to like 50,000 hertz or something like that. Like 50.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. And I was like, wow, these are amazing. Yeah, it's wild.
I remember when Andrew Sheps came on the podcast, that was sort of the first time I heard somebody talking really confidently about learning how to mix in headphones. And he wasn't even talking about fancy headphones. He was just talking about those Sony...
Those Sony cans that everyone had, the drummer cans.
7506s or something like that.
Yeah, the tracking cans, the one with the blue on the side. Yeah, those ones are... it's about learning. More importantly, it's about learning your speakers, learning your room, and learning how you hear music. Because everyone hears music differently. Some people, we all have different ears and different aesthetics of what we like. But it's important to know what you like and how you like to work, and not apologize for it. Some people are like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I have these speakers." I'm like, "Don't apologize. You're doing amazing music with Yamahas. Like there's no apology to be had."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that artist didn't know that Avantones or the Oratones are really small speakers. Just turn them up.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, what about monitors that you like to mix on now? Did you say those were the Pro 2As, or was that
the Ocean Waves? Yeah, the Ocean Waves. They go really loud, and they have a really detailed low end. I actually had them checked out and like a little bit modded at Ocean Way when Alan Sides was there, and me and him were talking for like an hour, and he's got so many great stories about the record business. And I just told him, I listened to them blind. I put on mixes that I knew. I was shopping for monitors, and I just played songs. And I just heard incredible low end out of those speakers, and I was like, I think this is it. People think I have a sub, but I'm like, I don't have a sub.
Interesting.
They just go really low. They're really interesting too, design wise as well.
Well, I mean, I have subs, and I love the way my room sounds, but I do think it's a question of when you have a speaker that just simply has, I don't know how many cones there are in those, but when the speaker itself just goes down to the lows, then you're not, technically you're not introducing crossovers and any phase correlations that need to line up. So I always wonder if that's kind of a nice way to hear a clarity and low end as well. What about the headphones? What advice do you have for the rock stars about what they might expect to run into learning how to mix on headphones? Like, for example, I've started mixes on headphones and I was like really excited where I was like, wow, I can really hear, like I can hear where I'm setting the gate on this thing and all that kind of stuff. But then I would take the mix out and go to the speakers and I was like, oh my God, it's so mid-rangey and like ripping my head off kind of thing. And I'd have to readjust. Are there things like that where you found there like stuff like that you would expect?
I think with headphones, I reference a lot in conjunction with the headphones. So I'll start a mix, do the edits, like we're talking about with the RX with those headphones on, take them off, check the monitors, start mixing, put the headphones back on, listen to the record for the detail, and then kind of take them off. But then sometimes I'll listen to the car. And since I have different reference points, it kind of helps me figure out, okay, I got these headphones sounding really good where they are, but let me check somewhere else and see if I'm missing a spot. Kind of like having blind spots on your car. Like you're looking, you got a bunch of mirrors around you for a reason to check your blind spots. And I just found that they're good to listen down to and to check mixes and to kind of get vocal level. If something's a little bit too sizzly, you can kind of figure it out. But I don't completely mix on headphones. Like I start a whole mix and finish it. Maybe I could. If I was working remotely, that would be my choice. But I like having reference points in a sense of knowing at what source, what are you listening for? Like I'm not listening for crazy low end out of my iPhone. I'm listening for clarity on the vocal and the instruments. Like what three main components am I hearing through my iPhone? If I'm in my car, I'm listening for low end. If it's a little bit too boomy in my car, I know it's probably too much bass and I just adjust. And it's just about knowing why you have different reference points and what they're good for.
Yeah.
Like the oratones are good for the mid-range, and the synths are good for the mid-range and the brightness and balance. 'Cause not every speaker is gonna get everything you want. Maybe there's some people that have speakers and they just know that speaker well. But I always tell myself, most people don't have this setup. Who's listening to this music? So I'm going to listen to my iPhone and I'm going to listen to my car, because I was thinking about music in everyday life. And I was thinking most people don't listen to music by themselves with no distraction. Music is almost background. So, I have this like a rain app. It's like it plays like rain sounds, like white noise. Like I'll turn that up while playing down the mix and see if it gets drowned out by anything, if the vocals get drowned out, That's
cool. That's a good tip. I am totally blown away with Isotope Ozone, rock stars. I've been mastering a lot of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy for me to get a fantastic sound. The mastering assistant will help you get started by measuring your track and suggesting all the settings you need to get a professionally targeted result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You simply adjust the settings to your own taste and it sounds incredible. And don't get me started on Master Rebalance, which literally lets you reach into the mix and manipulate the vocals, bass, and drums at the mastering stage. My bandmates are pretty demanding of my mixes, but now when I send off the masters masters for approval, I get comments back like, holy shit, pristine, damn good mastering, crystal clear, dude, you're a wizard. Finally, I love my singing. And the drums and bass sound huge. Check out the newest Ozone, RX, and all the other great plugins at iZotope.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. OWC is your one-stop shop for flexible drive storage and connectivity solutions for your studio. The Mini Stack STX for your Mac Mini adds 2 additional drives over a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and an NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD, plus 3 additional Thunderbolt USB ports. The OWC Thunder Bay 4 chassis, built like a tank, gives you 4 hot-swappable 2.5-inch RAID configurable drive bays, plus an extra Thunderbolt 3 jack for daisy chaining up to 5 devices. Or check out the OWC Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock with 2 RAID configurable drives and 7 ports of connectivity, including a front-side SD card reader, 1 gig Ethernet, 2 USB 3.2 ports, a dedicated display port, and an additional backward-compatible Thunderbolt port. Get your studio connected with the Mini Stack STX, Thunder Bay 4, and Gemini Thunderbolt 3 dock at macsales.com/rockstars. Use the custom link in our show notes because it's a great way for you to help support this podcast. So thanks, Rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Sam Sherbin, joining us from LA to talk more about mixing. And we're really going to dive into how he mixes and gets the low end to sound killer, gets the vocals to sound killer, gets it all loud and proud, and pretty much everything you want to know about mixing. So, Sam, are you ready to jam, dude?
Awesome. Yep.
Cool,
Ready.
man. Glad to have you here. Tell us, do you mix from a template? Is that part of a process for you? What do you want to say about that? And how do you start a mix?
Wow. Yeah. I do have a template. I have a mixing template that basically is like a master channel and an aux to record the mix into different kind of subgroups for different instruments and a bunch of effects there. And everything is inactive. Nothing is on. The stereo bus, none of those things are on. And what I do pre-mix is most important thing is like I have to color code everything, color code my vocals, drums, guitars. I place everything, I get everything ready, and then I A/B the stems to the rough mix and make sure that they match section by section. And beforehand, I'll find a key and find a BPM, and I'll tempo map the session. I just like having the session and knowing exactly what I'm looking at all times.
So quick question for you. What are the situations where knowing the key is going to help you out in a mix?
Knowing the key, basically, you're working with vocals, or there might be a key change in the track. And it's just good to know. Not necessarily completely need to know it, but I mainly keep the tempo more than just the key. There's something called, there's a bunch of like mixing key identifier softwares. You could use those.
I know Autotune's got one that will just...
Yeah, Autotune has one. Yeah, that helps a lot too. And so like usually I'll tempo map the session and then make sure everything hits on the bars and the beats and your arrangement is good, and then you're ready to go. I think the part, some people rush too quickly to mix and they're mixing something that's completely wrong. Like they'll be mixing the wrong arrangement, or the vocals might be out of sync, and then you just wasted your time. So it's good to slow down, make sure that you have everything that you need to be successful in your first mix pass.
And so that brings up tools like setting up a reference track. So when you say A being stems against the rough mix, what are some ways that you set up for that? Do you use plugins like Metric AB or Reference or any of those kind of tools, or do you have other ways of doing it?
Yeah, I use a reference A/B. That's really good because then you could put it into sync mode and then it'll sync completely. Then also you have loudness matching, so you can raise or decrease the volume of the ref. So if the ref is really loud, you could decrease it to match what your levels are, and you could A/B it without the level discrepancy.
Yeah. I had used one from mastering the mix called Reference mostly, but then recently I got Metric AB as part of Plugin Alliance, and it seems really cool. I like the fact that you can, when you talk about syncing it, we're talking about sometimes where you are on the timeline when you're mixing is in a different location slightly than the mix, which starts at 0 and goes for 3 minutes or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. And shout outs to Plugin Alliance. I love them and proud Plugin Alliance artists as well. They're really innovative and great company.
Any other cool plugins from Plugin Alliance you want to bring up? Probably like a lot, right?
The Tomo Lisa is great. I know the GUI is very overwhelming to look at because they actually modeled how the hardware looks. But I did presets for them, and there's a preset called Modern Pop.
Which one is that?
Tomo Lisa plugin. It's like a red EQ. It's a dynamic EQ. It's amazing. Everything runs in parallel. Has parallel compression bands. The EQ is in parallel. The whole thing is in parallel. It's amazing. And it also has a dedicated transformer emulation that's separate from the output.
Oh, very cool.
So I did a bunch of presets for that plugin. The loop charter, distortion box, I use that. I use the Kirchhoff EQ now. They're just main staples. I just kind of know them like front and back, and I have they're just doing it right. I love that company.
Yeah. Some of the ones that I started using recently and was really blown away with were all the bass amp emulators. Because it's for me, especially recording bands, I was like, oh my God, it's now all I have to do is just get a killer DI sound on the bass, and we can completely dial in a phase accurate bass amp recording without having to actually set up a bass amp. It's fun to set up a real bass amp, but I find in a small studio, sometimes it's a challenge because of isolation. It's like having it in its own space was a little bit challenging for me. So that was really, really handy. There's a ton of plugins over there, so we don't have to get, when you think of one, bring it up.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. So you start your mixes with the template. Do you ever find, and even Bruce encouraged you to go try all the plugins and stuff, but how do you handle plugin overwhelm? Because I think we're all familiar with that. How do you avoid, an endless trial and error of plugins?
I think it's about understanding what you need versus what you want. You could want a plugin and you could tell yourself, hey, I want this. This is new. But I always try to ask myself, does this solve a problem? Is this a problem I'm having right now? Like if I have a session and I'm missing a plugin, do I need to buy that plugin in order to get the session running? Yes. And I try not to think of plugins as like gear in the sense of like, oh, I totally want this plugin. It's going to change my life. I kind of see it as I'm like, is this a different tool in my toolkit that I already have plugins that I bought and I thought I needed when I was, younger, and I never used those tools. I kind of, the thing about plugins, you have to be familiar with a certain amount of tools. Like if you know the RComp really well and you know Pro Q3, that's going to serve you tons more than buying another Pultec emulation to see if it sounds more or less like a real Pultec than the other emulation that you had.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's some tools that are innovative where they don't have a hardware emulation, like the split EQ by Eventide, where you can EQ the tonal versus the transient information. That's really cool. I don't have anything like that does that tool, that has that ability. So I try to tell myself that too. I try to tell myself, well, do I need it or do I want it? If I want it, you know, can I demo it? And if I demo it and I don't like it, I don't force myself to like a plugin because it looks cool or my friend says it's amazing. If it doesn't work out for me, it doesn't work out for me. I can't, I just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's expensive. It really is. People think, oh, plugins are not expensive as gear. I'm like, some of these plugins are $200, $300. It's a lot of money.
Right. And you've
when
got
you
a
add
lot
it
of,
up.
you end up with a lot more plugins than you would have ended up with gear in the studio.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if all your plugins was a physical unit, it would kind of look like that photo I think of like Jack Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Jack Joseph Puig studio.
Yeah.
Tell us more about the split EQ. What are some instruments that you find yourself trying that out on?
I actually don't have that EQ. I just demoed it. I was thinking we're talking about want versus need. That's more like a want.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something I need down the line, but when I did use it, it was really cool for like drums, you know, like let me pull the transient out of this snare drum, but I don't want to lose the brightness, but I want someone to click out. So you can go to the I think transient side and EQ some of that out while preserving the tonal aspects of it. So
that's
yeah,
cool.
I don't have it yet, but I know that it's a cool tool for those things.
You know who else makes something like that is Boz Millar, Boz Digital. I think they have one that did a similar thing where it's like you've got the transient and the sustain side and you can EQ them each differently.
Yeah, those tools are just amazing. I always like worry about those tools because of like phase and how they like reconnect the audio, but if they're mathematicians over there, right? So they probably figured it out.
If it sounds good when you're done. And also, you know, I do think that that's probably a slight difference in thinking, maybe between doing acoustic instruments like a full drum kit versus sampled sounds. Because with samples, if you have a single sound, then you can kind of manipulate it any way you want to see what you end up with. But sometimes when you're doing multiple mics on a drum kit and you're manipulating one part of it, you know, you can start to pull your hair out because you feel like you're unintentionally affecting the rest of the drum kit. And you're like, maybe I got to do it differently or whatever.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see. And then, so when you're trying to avoid the plugin overwhelm, your advice is to just sort of avoid buying too many. So you just don't have too many all at once. But do you find your template also helps you avoid that just by having things pre-selected where you don't have to go hunt for plugins? Because that's a big challenge for me is, you know, when I think, I should go look for something, it's like, oh boy, this is like, it's like reading a novel to try and find find it in the list on the screen, you know?
Yeah, I think that does help. Like if I have different plate reverbs, instead of having one on a template that says plate, I have one that I like and I have like 3 inactive ones. And I'm like, oh, I don't like this one. Let me try this one. And they all get edited some way. I never really keep the settings completely the same, but I know that at least, hey, this is a delay. This is a verb. This is my sunset sounds. And, you know, like they're just different things because I like to stay creative when I'm working and I don't want to overthink what do I need. You know, when I start a mix, hearing the song, I might activate some of the plugins that I think I will need. And since I work in so many different genres, I can just pick and choose. I'm like, well, this is more of an acoustic song and they have an acoustic guitar versus something that's completely electronic, and then start opening up some parallel chains and see if that works. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times I don't even use those. It's like sometimes I'll have things ready to go and I'm looking at the mix, I'm not using half of those, but I was thinking in advance, maybe it'll be cool to have, but I just go back to what does the song need and how do I need to get there, you know?
Yeah. All right. So here's a question that might be relevant to that. If the kick and bass, if you're opening up a mix, and maybe any of the tracks in there, but kick and bass particular, I think, doesn't feel right. Do you find that the solution is to try and fix it in the mix, or do you sometimes look to replace the kick and the bass sounds and reconstruct them somehow?
That's rare. I usually think that if the song and the session and the sounds came to me the way that they intended to be, I don't really mess with it. I might do some sample replacement if I think the kick is not hitting enough, in a sense it's not punchy. It may be too subby sounding, and it needs to be more clicky sounding. So I might use a sample that just has a clicky part and then put that into the sound and try to, instead of changing the sound completely, try to find the piece of the sound that you're missing with the sample replacement. But that's pretty rare. Some of the producers I'm working with are just absolutely amazing at finding their own sounds and knowing how these guys work. Working with a lot of producers, sometimes I'll mix in their home studios and just like mix on their setup and see how they work. I'm like, yeah, like they're finding the right sounds from the jump, Splice or these sample libraries or their own libraries. So it's good to know that.
Where if you needed to find a click for a kick drum sound, for example, what are the places you would look in your own setup? Would you look for a sample? You said Splice. Is that a really useful place to find certain sounds? Or are there some things that just are sound generators that you would sort of recreate the sound real quick?
Yeah, that would be like Slate has some stuff. They're kind of just more like a clicky top end kind of like drum sound or whatever.
You mean Slate like Trigger?
Yeah, Trigger. So I just use Trigger and then look at what kind of sounds that they have and then see if one of those fit the kind of issues I'm having. But most of the time those don't really present themselves, but it's good to know that I have the tools to fix it, remedy it.
Are we talking about, or are you talking about sometimes being able to use like a Slate, a tacky kick drum that's an acoustic kick drum and adding that to like a 808 style kick and getting the right click that way? Or is this more like working on an actual bass drum that's part of a drum kit and getting that dialed in properly?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more like a synthesized kick, and you could do that to give it more click. Sometimes they might just have too many round kicks, and it's not punchy enough from a transient perspective. And instead of just using a transient designer that has the envelope might not sound natural if you try to crank up the attack and then pull down the sustain to try to make the envelope sharper. It's good to just have one of those in your toolkit to make it punch out. And it also helps too with acoustic drum kits.
That's a good reminder that in Slate Trigger, you have all these manipulation controls in there. Everything from velocity adjustment. So if you wanted every kick to hit exactly as loud as every other kick, you can kind of make your kick drum do that. And then if you want to just have them be really quick, even though the kick sample is long, you can you just dial back the envelope, right? That's what you're saying?
Yeah, you could do that. It's cool, amazing tools that it has like already preset in there. And then you could layer multiple ones and kind of rebalance them with the inboard mixer. So you could use 3 different samples. Cool. Yeah, I think it's a good tool to have.
All right, so let me start referencing a couple of records from your discography. And Rockstar, as a reminder, just scroll down to the show notes, and there's going to be a link in there for the discography, so you can go listen to all these records that Sam's mixing and hear all how great they sound. Hear all these different low end treatments, kicks, basses, all that stuff, vocals. Just all of it. So Halima, if I'm pronouncing it right, Ford Cardinal is one of the tracks in there. It's got a really cool kick that reminds me kind of like a soft beater on a kick drum, like a really pillowy beater, but it's this kind of thump sound as opposed to a long 808, which is like doom, or as opposed to a dance kick even, which is very attacky, or can be. but it also has tons of low end and seems to like sustain for the right amount of time. Are there tricks to making a kick read better by manipulating the length of it, even if it's so kind of a short, quick thump kick? Do you have any thoughts about like just even the different types of kicks that are out there, and how do you think about them all?
Yeah, I really love that song. Halima self-produced that song. That's all her production. And I did one sample replacement, I think, in the choruses. I changed a different kind of 808 sound, I guess. But yeah, it's a very amazing kind of like neo-soul R&B record, and it kind of needed a kind of more subtle treatment, but also it needs to work in a pop space vocally, and it needs to hit a certain way. And that's when I use the sample to just make the choruses, I guess, open up more, kind of like vertically. It kind of opens up more, and once it has that low end, it kind of gives you an excitement, and knowing that you're in the choruses, that also helps with low end. Like when you start treating low end a little bit differently versus choruses, it helps your ear say, oh, we're definitely in chorus time right now versus, verse time. So, yeah, that song was great. And, it was one of the few songs I did do some drum replacement on, but.
Yeah, it's just interesting. When I was listening through all the stuff, and then I heard that one and it hit me. I was like, wow, it's like this kick is totally punchy. It like completely hits you, but it's also like really soft sounding. And I just thought that was just such a curious combination, such a cool combo.
Yeah, it's very much, it's very amazing, intricate production. And, when I'm mixing, I would just close my eyes and just listen to the record and emotionally connect with the record versus thinking of things to fix or thinking of, I try to just sit back and just listen to the song as a song and not as a person working on the song.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, like now, like, oh, I really got into the song. Like we went by 3 minutes and I went through the whole journey. And that's kind of how I evaluate when I'm done. 'Cause I think someone asked me, when do you feel like you're done? I'm like, I'm done when you just had that response as a listener, like, this sounds great. It feels great. It could, some records could sound great and just, you don't feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, I think some people think just sound in itself, sounding good is just enough. And I feel like that does help, but I feel like emotionally people want to connect with records, So emotionally, I use that as my meter of I'm done,
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM, TV, and film composers all have in common? They all need incredibly cool sounds that instantly transport the music to the style that they want. This is why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit with a massive library of sounds. Whether you want to create hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, pumping dance floor beats, or full orchestral arrangements, Native Instruments Complete Bundle offers you everything you need, from drums, loops, and beats to wild synths, ultra-realistic strings, and vintage electric bass, guitars, and keys. The list goes on and on. I personally love recording real bands in my studio and adding cool drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. Plus, it's super fun to create a string section for a rock band. Come on, go get Complete Start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples over at nativeinstruments.com and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off. Some restrictions apply. Audio. introduces the all-new A-Series line of monitors, featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, built-in DSP-based room correction, and speaker voicings to allow you to customize your Atom audio monitors to your control room. The A-Series will rock in any studio. Small studio spaces or immersive multi-speaker configurations are perfect for the A4V or the new A7V, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. Mid-size rooms and narrow spaces will love the low profile of the A44H, expanding on the A7V sound, or the A77H, a true three-way midfield monitor delivering rich, spacious sound. And bigger studios will love the A8H, a three-way speaker and the pinnacle of the A-Series that delivers extremely accurate sound required for critical listening environments. Get the Atom audio monitors and subwoofers that are right for your studio with an extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. So famously, Michael Jackson had a pair of speakers installed in the ceiling so he could listen to the stuff being recorded and decide if he could dance in the back of the room. At least that's the legend that I heard. Do you ever find yourself getting up out of the chair and having to move around to tell if your mix is feeling right? And how important is it to have that kind of dancing experience? I guess if it's dance music, that's more important than if it's not meant to be danced to necessarily.
Yeah, I'll do that. I would go about my day. I just hit play on Pro Tools and maybe, walk around the house and, read a book or something lightly and
read a book lightly.
yeah. Read a just kind of like, magazine and just scroll through it and just kind of not be listening
right
so directly. And
are you allowed to read the Pro Tools manual, or is that off limits?
The Pro Tools manual? No. Yeah, and then in the cars too. The car is a great place to listen to records because it's like it. I don't know. Yeah. I think people spend so much time in the car and they're always listening to music, and sometimes you might have someone who's like skip, like they're just not in the mood to hear that song, and they just skip it.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the first beat, and they're like, no, I don't want to hear this, and they skip. And they just listen to that, and they just, vibe. How did it feel in the car? It sounds good. And just take it from there. I think
what's a car? What kind of car do you like to listen to your stuff in? Did you pick something with a particular stereo, or do you just sort of have what you got and you know it well?
Yeah, I have a hybrid, Hyundai Ioniq. And I just know that speaker system so well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of bland sounding.
But like stock, things, right?
Yeah, stock. There's nothing, I didn't EQ. It's just flat. And just listening to so many records on there, kind of knowing where things sit. And it's very interesting to hear like stereo feel, like how wide things are in the car. Like, how they sound really wide and how good do they sound. And sometimes I'll have a playlist and I'll play another mainstream record just to see how it fits contextually, not as a reference experiment. Like, I want my kick drum to sound like this song. Like, no, I'm like, do they sound relative to what else is out there? I think there's something to be said about familiar things. Like, songs sounding familiar enough where people gravitate towards it, but different enough that they're like, I haven't really heard this before.
Yeah, I mean, I find a number of things helpful, but particularly bass and low end, like for all the cars I've ever had, to be honest. But the car I've got now is definitely the best stereo I've ever had because it's a Tesla, and it's pretty fun. And I mean, like, it's interesting to me too, because even listening through your discography, there were a couple of tracks. I wasn't quite taking notes at that point because I was moving quickly and just listening. But there were a couple where I was like, oh, wow, the kick in the low end really just like hits on this one. Something might stand out to me. And then when I go listen in the studio, it's different, and it's like,
and
maybe in the studio, like everything hits me right. and I don't remember which one it was or whatever. But it's just I'm always, and that's not to say anything specific about this collection of songs. I'm just saying, like, all the time this happens to me where I'm like, I'm trying to get a sense of what's going on in the low end in the studio, and then I get a different feeling in the car, and the car's like, sometimes the car feels like, oh, it's so obvious, and then even then you go make a change, you go back to the studio, and you're like, I don't know, man, I'm not so sure,
Yeah, I think that's when I send a mix out. When I start to get into that mode of thinking where it's like I go in the car, I listen to it, I adjust it, then I go and then listen to the speakers. I'm like, but they're simulating low end differently. They're completely different environments.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, if I'm going back and forth one time, I'm sending the record out. I'm not going into the feedback loop of like, is the kick too much, or the 808 too much, or the vocals too low, and then you start going to dangerous territory where you're like, you almost don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and it's the scary thing is you can start to undo your mix.
Oh yeah, you could immediately undo the mix quickly like that, and then also you can get into an insecurity where the client, is kind of paying you for your confidence as a mixer, saying this is right. I'm going to send this pass out. This feels right. Here I go. Like all the mixers that I know who are just great, they're just very confident. They're like, hey, I'm mixing it, I'm sending it out, and that's it. I'm not gonna go back and forth and kill myself over does it sound good in my car or not. They're like they're too busy, like, I already know how it sounds in this room. I just like using the car and the headphones as like a second reference to listen to it on, a different way to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always finalize on the speakers because I'm like, I know those the best.
Yeah.
So those are like the final ones where I'm like, yes, this feels right. And but the headphones are cool. I mean, I've have clients come over and I mix records with clients over, and I give them the headphones. I'm like, listen to it, and then they love listening to it on those Odyssey headphones. They really enjoy that process.
If you're doing bass-centric music, bass music, I don't know what what other terms there are to describe it, but stuff that's got big 808s. Have you ever found that it's just really fun to go when somebody's just got a super sub maxed out car, which is a whole bunch of subs in it, to just go crank that up like that?
I don't know. I kind of like a balanced listening experience. I don't need so much like theater when it comes with it. Like, like, oh, let's crank the speaker up really, really loud and get everyone excited about the record. Like, yeah. I don't listen to records like that. I kind of listen to it kind of normally, but knowing what the low end is doing, what the vocals are doing. It's more important, like, what's the vocals and the main melody lines doing, and the low end supports it. Like, low end, I feel like it's credibility now in the sense of how your record may stand next to someone else's record, because so many pop records are getting lower and lower in frequencies, but they're also getting high, like they're getting brighter as well. So it's like the spectrum is kind of opening up, and I feel like if people, and a lot of producers have told me this, they're like, if my drums are not hitting, I think the mixes, they'll like, you have to make the drums hit all times. Like a lot of producers that I know, no matter what genre they're in, they're like, if I'm working on any drums, my drums better sound good.
Yeah.
Because that's like the foundation of the whole record. They're like, if the drums aren't right, then.
Yeah. And I mean, the funny thing about records is once you get into listening to it, once you get over the threshold of the beginning of a song and you're immersed in the song, you sort of forget, I mean, I think as mixers, we train ourselves to hold on to the memory of what something could be sounding like right now in this moment. But I think for most listeners, it's like, once you're past that threshold of listen, you're now in the song, people aren't thinking about like, oh, I wonder if the bass should be up or down a little bit more. They're just like, If the song feels good, that's all they're thinking about. And they're probably listening to the singer anyway.
Yeah, the singer, just listening to singer. I mean, if you think about a record like the Billie Eilish album,
Yeah.
amazing low end, amazing, but it's just so it was so much it was so much low end, and it was just incredible just to hear someone just take Phineas, producer, and Rob the mixer, just take so many risks
Mhm.
on that record and just make it out there, and just like here's our vision of here's our vision, not overthought, like this is what we like. And
Yeah.
as artists, you just have to make your art.
How often, speaking of which, that also reminds me when I first heard that, hearing, I forget which track it was, but hearing how they sort of intentionally distorted the low end so that it almost sounded, even at a lower volume, it almost sounded like your trunk was rumbling.
Yeah.
Which was a very cool effect. Do you find yourself often adding, I mean, I think it's normal to add some saturation and overtones to low end so that it reads more clearly on multiple speakers, right?
Yeah, I definitely do that a little bit. I try not to do too much because I know that these producers are already pre-treating these sounds a
Yeah.
lot, or the sounds are treated enough. And
they probably don't want something to come back and it's like, whoa, you changed
yeah,
changed what we
yeah.
did.
Yeah, like especially some of these producers are the Grammy nominated, Grammy award winning producers, and they have a particular sound, and then like just mix the record, and um that's like high level mixers, it's like 5% better, but it's like the right 5% better.
Right.
And that's when you starting to get the upper echelons of the Sherbins and the Manny Marroquins and these Andrew Sheps, kind of mixers where that's a different skill. Like it's one skill to mix a song that is kind of in bad shape and make it sound better, but there's another skill where you have an absolutely amazing record and you have to make that even better.
Yeah.
And it's already amazing. Like the producer could send the producer mix to mastering, and it could still be highly successful. But they're coming to a mixer for that 5%. I think that's amazing to think about. Like I think about that as well. It's like that 5% difference.
Yeah.
Where is it, in the song when it's that good?
It's funny. I feel like people used to say looking for that last 10%, but sounds like it's gotten even more competitive. It's now down to 5.
Yeah. I feel like it's 5. I feel like it's 5.
Yeah. Well, it's more fun to work on something that already sounds great and you're trying to get that last 5%. I mean, it might be stressful at times, but it's and it is kind of fun to take something that's a little broken and fix it, but it's not fun to take stuff that's broken and it can't really be fixed.
Yeah, I think it's cool to also see and work on something and see people's reactions and how much people love music as a fan after you've been mixing it. Like I'm mixing songs and then it goes out into the world, and then you start seeing other people enjoying the music as music fans, and I'm like, wow, like this is amazing, because like we're hearing it for the first time, and I feel like mixers, we're like, the ideal listener. We're like the ideal car stereo guy. It's like, oh, just add a little bit of treble, a little bit of bass, and it'll just sound good. It's like we're like the detailed version of that. Can you imagine if you're listening to music and you're like, man, I wish I could put some cool effect on this person's voice. It'll make this song sound so much cooler if there was like some weird effect, And I kind of think of music like that. It's like I'm still a listener first and foremost, but I'm just a trained listener who can manipulate the music.
Hearing you talk about the add a little bass, add a little treble, I slightly suspect that the beginning of my engineer interest was that time I had a junky car, but I got a little graphic EQ and put it in there. So all of a sudden I had all these sliders to play with for like sculpting the sound in my car.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's so, I mean, you could do so much with just EQ. I mean, you take 7K out. Oh my God, this song sounds different. You could filter the band filter the whole record. You could, take 1K out and see what that sounds like. It's amazing to know what we could do with just the basic tools in front of us, with panning, EQ, and compression.
Yeah, indeed. EQ is a great start. Level, I always like to think mixing is like the first thing to learn is the mute button. Second thing to learn is the fader. Next is panning, then EQ, then compression. Maybe first thing to learn is effects or sing well.
yeah, sing well. That's important.
All right, so Cecilia Galt, that's another artist, or Cecilia, maybe the album. That's the artist, right?
Yeah, Cecilia Galt.
Great. Some of those tracks have a really great punchy kick and sub bass that work really well together. So more questions about that. What are some ways to get an 808 kick or a punchy bass and low bass to work together really well in a mix? What stuff you hinted at sidechain things. Maybe talk a little bit about what goes on in your template as far as how you start building your mix and setting the sub bass, the kick, so that all that sounds right. And then hopefully I want to make sure I ask you about vocals and some other stuff before we run out of time here too. But give us some, geek out a little bit on some stuff that we could try as far as making sure that the foundation of our mix is sounding great in the low end.
Yeah, I think it's funny because people talk about my low end. I'm like, I really don't do that much. I really don't.
Maybe like, that's it. Maybe that's part of the answer.
I really don't. I like the Manny EQ. I like the Spectre harmonic additive EQ. For me, it's about carving around the 808, right? So it's like we have an 808. The tone is strong. You're using your fader. Sometimes the 808 needs to come down 2 dB, and you need to carve the low end out of other things. Like maybe there's too much 300 hertz in the synth. You take that out, and then all of a sudden your 808 is starting to punch because you're filtering low end out of the things that don't need the information. When you think about a mix, there's only so much energy we could put, and we're kind of placing instruments in different, I guess, energy pockets, right?
Yeah.
And there's only a few instruments that need the entire spectrum, and vocals need as much of the spectrum as possible.
So you might find yourself, would it be safe to say that you might roll off the low end more on some of the instruments and percussion and stuff, but with the vocal, you don't want to roll off too much low end?
Yeah. Like if there's a high percussion sound and it's only really going up to 6K and up, but there's still something rumbling beneath that, you can clean that up, and it helps clean up the low end so that when the 808 comes out, it comes out naturally and it's not being muddied by all these frequencies that you're not necessarily hearing, but it's taking the clarity out from the low end. And with vocals, I kind of just do it by ear. Some people are like, oh, I always high pass at 100 or whatever. I'm like, and then I go too far, and then I go back and I figure out where's the warmth of the vocal. You don't want them to sound too thin, obviously, but you want to be able to control any issues that arise from too much low end. But if you got like a Frank Sinatra kind of voice, like you got to be careful.
Right, right. Well, Frank Sinatra singing over an 808,
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen.
I don't know.
Maybe with the AI technology,
Do you ever feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take you years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David, quote, "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mix process that I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, but condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session," close quote. Look, I'm so confident that this will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And I'll see you at the front row table of the Grammys. Cheers. So I'll just keep asking this. This is really an extension of that same question, but Sage, Charmaine, Don't Leave Me. That was one of the tracks where I was like, wow, that's got a great separation between massive 808 bass low end and all the vocals and other elements in the mix, not competing with that, but also not really sounding too thinned out or something. That's the thing that's like such a brain twister when you learn this stuff, I think, is sometimes you hear it and you're just like, it just sounds right. And then, maybe you learn it's like, oh, but I can really get away with cutting a lot of the lows out of all these instruments and other parts that just don't need to have them. And they still sound great, And I guess it's like, the other part of the brain twister is realizing I don't hear that this part has a lot of low end, but even just that little bit of low information and sub information that's just in there, it's just clouding up and it's like competing with the low end that's supposed to be in the record, that 808 sound or the bass, right?
Yeah. I think, I guess it's just what feels right, and what sounds right to you. And, I don't know. A lot of it is just like a feeling thing. I it sounds, cliche, but it's like if you listen to a lot of music and how music makes you feel, we have these techniques, but some of these techniques go by the wayside when you're working because you're like, I got to do what I got to do. I mean, I was just doing a mix yesterday and the client kind of wanted a different, dirtier, like kind of grittier sound. And I'm like, I'm just going to make something up and put Devil Lock on here and Decapitator on Punish. I'm like, I'm going to just try something. And they're like, we love this. And I'm like, I had to just come up with something creative and say to myself, there's no rule book to this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some, so Devil Lock, what was the other one you mentioned?
Decapitator on Punish.
Right. That's a really good one. Are there some other, how do I want to ask this? Are there some other really good, fun plugins to try for adding dirt to sounds? And then the flip side of this question is, God, I wish Pro Tools would let you create your own Pro Tool plugin categories. Because I think about plugins in terms of like, oh, these are all my bass ones. Oh, these are the ones I'll use on the snare. Oh, these are all the ones I'll like dirty up something with. But it doesn't really list them that way, unless there's a way to do it that I don't know about.
Yeah. If you're on the latest Pro Tools, you could do a save preset. You could save a chain, and then you could save that into like a folder, and you could say, I have like Sam pop vocal for this artist because like I'm working on multiple songs. I'm like, you know what, this chain seemed to work. I'm going to save this chain, go into the menu and then search that artist, and then the chain will pop up and it'll load back up.
Oh,
and
that's
then I'll adjust it. Yeah.
So that's a track preset. So you're basically
preset.
Pulling in a blank track with all those plugins on it, and then you might just drag certain plugins over to the track you're mixing on, possibly, or something like that.
Yeah. Just to streamline it, so I'm not like looking for it. It's like, oh, they're already there.
Yeah.
Yeah, your question again? What you were saying?
It's all right. Actually, the other part I wanted to say is when you mentioned Devil Lock, it reminded me of this other plugin I started using that's similar to that called Loch Ness from Tone Empire. They're making some really cool plugins. So just quick shout out to them.
Oh yeah, you said distortion. Yeah, the loop charter by Plugin Alliance is really, really cool.
Oh,
Cool
okay,
one.
cool.
And it has a magic button. That's kind of another saturation device. I think it comes from the summing unit of Loop Charter has a summing unit, so I think that comes from a different unit. And there's something more subtle, which is the oven, which is like a
Right.
harmonic EQ plugin. So that's a little bit more on the
That's from
subtler side.
Mayor Applebaum.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I haven't tried that yet. So, and I was under the impression that he had sort of originally designed that unit to be a mastering tool, but is that something you can kind of dirty up and add a little bit of something harmonic to individual instruments and stuff?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it has like tools where you could calibrate the headroom on it, and it just has a more of a gentle saturation sound versus something that like a decapitator, which is more like aggressive and harsh, and
Yeah.
or not harsh if you're using a different model or whatever. But it's yeah, we have so much, and then of course there's lo-fi. I use lo-fi all the time.
Right. I always
On
forget
just
about
one or
lo-fi.
two, lo-fi is amazing.
Yeah, that's funny that you said that because that was one of Chris James's tips was to use. He was like, put lo-fi on the whole mix and just do 1% distortion. And it was like this, like just like one notch better or something, you know. I think it was on the whole mix, but just like, you know, just using that in little bits.
Yeah, I use it probably like one or two.
Yeah.
And it just seems to do something. Also, the bit rate, you could turn it down to like 15 bits or 8 bits.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And then like Isotope Trash, that's another one that I need to explore more, but you know, like you can go in and carve out all kinds of different distortions. And it's pretty fun to mess around with all that stuff. You know, there's such a variety of things out there. But once again, here I am trying to convince you to like overwhelm yourself with too many options, right? Okay, cool. So let me see here. What do I want to ask you about next? Oh yeah, let's go into vocal stuff a little bit more. So, well, this is a combination. So, the first one I'll ask is this like Stray Kids and Maron. Not sure how you pronounce that, but both those, like I noticed that there was a really like nice top end sheen going on with vocals. They sounded great, and I wanted to ask, like, what are some of the ways to give vocals in a mix that sort of clear, airy, upfront sound? You know, get all that kind of brightness without going over the top with it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, Marone is an incredible artist. A lot of vocals, a lot of probably like 80 tracks of vocals. Wow. It's a lot of stacks. It's a lot of stacks. Yeah.
That's a lot of Sony C800 mics.
Yeah. And I think it's about controlling. Everyone talks about like shelving. They're gonna do a 12K shelf or a 13K shelf. But I'm like, sometimes I'm dipping below like 6 to 8K, and that could be the sizzly part, and you just scoops a little bit some of that out and then add some top back on. It's really interesting because people like, you know, they say, hey, we love your top end, but I'm like, I'm not adding as much as I'm slowly taking little bits out. But when you hear it, you could hear a top end that just sounds grainy or it's a little bit it doesn't sound smooth. So also the other thing I would do, I use Smooth Operator, Baby Audio.
Okay.
Also have a preset on there called the Vocal Smooth. That worked really well on the Stray Kids because they have different timbres on all the members' vocals. We kind of had to make sure everyone kind of sit well in a nice space. And that's also the challenges of like mixing, you know, K-pop groups or artists who have a ton of vocal tracks. It's like, how do you contain all those vocals?
Yeah.
And make it sound cohesive without it sounding like too much or overwhelming.
Well, so one of the thoughts, especially when you think about vocals, is you know, they're doing all these vocal tracks and they're probably using the same vocal mic for all of them. And maybe maybe not unlike Bruce, where he might have people move around on the mic, maybe they're just in the same spot on the mic too. So when you start stacking vocals, right, we run into that risk of stacking all the anomalies of that vocal chain. It's like it kind of spikes whatever frequencies are already enhanced. Is that an accurate thing to say, you think? And is that something that you find yourself trying to address when you're doing vocal stacks?
I think with the vocal stacks, kind of take a little bit of that mid-range out in some of them because they do tend to rub against each other and try to deal with some of the boominess, because if they're all singing the same part and it's kind of this same timbre, but they're maybe in a different register, there might still be a little boominess there, and you kind of have to work that and always listen to everything in context. Like some people just listen to vocals and then when they put the track in, it sounds bad. So I'm listening to everything in context with the vocals and trying to make sure it sounds right. And you just have these really big artists and they have a lot of fans, and you got to make sure everyone is happy and everyone sounds as amazing as they possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever had the situation where you got to mix it and it doesn't show up with a rough mix? Like you don't have that guide of what they were thinking?
That rarely happens. I'm like, even if they have a demo that's not I have an artist sometimes, she'll send me a demo and it's not production, but she'll like, this is kind of how I like the vocals balance to be around. Mm-hmm. And that's at least an understanding of like, what part are they focusing on and what harmonies they're focusing on. So with singers, I notice a lot of them really focus on the vocals, especially if they're singing all those parts. They want to hear almost every single part, but then helping them understand like some parts could be second tier or third tier, still heard, but it's not completely in the forefront as far as the balance is concerned. Because if everything was up front, then everyone's like, oh my God, that just sounds like one big vocal instead of a layer of vocal, or right, a spread of background vocals that sound like they're in a space and they kind of sound like it's surrounding you versus it being in front of you consistently, like in your face.
Do you sometimes actually roll off the top of vocals?
Sometimes, yeah. If it's kind of harsh, roll off a little bit of that and kind of try to reconstruct that in my own way. It's a feel thing for me. Sometimes I'm taking the little EQ knob and just moving it around and feeling how does this sound? Does it sound better? And bypass is your friend. Mm-hmm. Bypass, check it, turn it back on, make sure you're not harming anything. And it helps get your brain kind of calibrated to like how it should sound. I think when you've been mixing long enough, you kind of know if something doesn't feel or sound right. You're like, oh, this is too much. And you can adjust accordingly.
Do you find that you also have to adjust levels so that you're sort of level matching your bypasses too? Make sure you're not fooling yourself just by hearing things louder?
Yeah, you could definitely do that. You could when you bypass it, you could do an A-B, have the B be down, and then you listen to it in context and you switch back to A on your plugin, and it'll have the original gain that you had, which is probably 0. So right, you could do that as well, because they have some plugins have snapshots. They have A, B, C, D. Yeah, and you can just swap them. So that's a cool thing to do with the B side.
Yeah, I need to do more of using that feature because it really can be great to, dial in 4 different. Well, what about this? What about that? And then just flip.
Yeah. Not worried that you lost something. You're like, oh, I have it right here.
This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. One way to think about it, I think, that, like, when I first started making YouTube videos, and I was like, oh, you have to pick a thumbnail image. I learned kind of quickly, or, even if you just took a bunch of photos of something, you learn quickly to just like flip through the photos as fast as you can. And like, oh, this one's better than all the others. We'll use this one. And it's, it's cool to be able to do that with audio too. Sometimes they're all pretty good, and all you're doing is you're just looking to choose the one that's a little better than the others.
Yeah, it's like Instagram filter, It's like, do I like monochrome or do I like the 70s vibe? Like, what you just click through. It's interesting to see producers work, because a lot of them will like just go through presets. Like, I like this sound, I don't like this sound, and then they just stick with one, adjust it, and kind of move on. And I try not to get so in the weeds with any particular thing. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, I kind of move on or adjust it to make it work. I try not to get stuck in a particular thing. Like, if I'm working on vocals and I'm just like dialing in it so much that I'm just lost, I'm like, no, I need to think about something else and continue working on the song and not get stuck on one particular part, unless it's like something major or something.
Yeah. Well, an example of knowing when it's good enough and to move on for me is like comping things or recording stuff in the studio, recording over and over until you get it, kind of thing. And then remembering, it's like, especially with comping, like, sometimes you find something, you're like, ooh, that sounds good. And then you're like, oh, but what about the other ones that I didn't listen to? And one day I was like, wait a minute, if it already sounds good, nobody's ever going to hear those other ones. It's like, if this take sounds good enough, even if there was a different take, if you don't use it, nobody in the world's ever going to hear it. So who cares? It's like,
no one's going to hear it. And you took the take that made you feel like, okay, this take is good, we're going to move on with the rest of the song, versus like, oh, is take number 37 better than this original one? And you kind of just go back and forth, and they're all going to be different. So you can hear nuances in every one.
Yeah.
But which one feels like the right one versus the one that may technically be the right one? Like,
it's like
a friend of mine that was a singer, she was saying that technically, she's like, oh, I sing better with lessons, but she like, sometimes if I'm singing a little bit differently or more emotional, even though it's wrong, it just feels better. I'm like, yeah, music is not like just an experiment of like, oh, is this the best actual take, or is this just the right one? Like, we're talking about Bruce Swedien, he mixed Billie Jean 92 times, and Quincy comes in and Quincy's like, play version 2. And you play version 2, and they're like, that's the one that feels right. That's the one that got everyone happy and said the record is done.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like same thing with the sounds, dialing in these plug-in sounds. It's like, if it's good, we'll never hear the other options. So move on,
Yeah. Can you imagine, like, they did that Beatles documentary with Peter Jackson, and then imagine how many takes of different songs that they had that we love, like Yesterday. Imagine if there was another verse on that, Can you imagine how many songs, I think Eminem said this on an interview I saw. He did a verse, and he said there was a different verse to one of his songs. I think it was Lose Yourself, where he won an Oscar. And he said there was a completely different verse, but it got erased. So I had to redo it, and I changed it. And I'm like, well, the pieces landed how they landed for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's one of those funny things. I've you don't want to have to redo something if you've already got it. But funny enough, those times where something accidentally got deleted or something and you had to redo it, I found that magically the new version is even better because people they step up to the plate and do it right.
Oh, you know what? They probably do it better because now they have a practice run. They're like, hey, this felt like a practice run, and now we really nailed it.
Yeah, but if you were like,
kinks.
just go ahead and do one that's better, they might be like,
Yeah, you're like, hey, can I get another take? And it's because I was watching the movie Air, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon about the Jordan sneaker, and I was like, how many takes do these actors do, and when do they know, like they're doing the same take over and over, and it's like an emotional take, and they got to do it over and over again. And it's like that takes a lot of courage and a lot of like energy to be able to be that emotional and have to do that over and over again, in front of a cast and crew.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're hearing the dogs, they all got let out in the neighborhoods. They're all barking in the background, but we could do this podcast over and over again to try and get a no dog take, but this is the one, rock stars. This is the one we're using.
There's a lot of dogs in my neighborhood, unfortunately.
Yeah. I asked my neighbors they're very accommodating, and I'm like, hey, I'll be doing an interview from this time, but I think they were like literally like as soon as the time was up, they're like, dogs are out. So maybe that's my cue. Let me ask you one more question, then the closing question. Is that cool? You have enough time for that?
Yeah.
Okay, groovy. So again, Cecilia Galt, As Long As It's You, has this super wide effect on the kind of synth. I don't know if it's the like upper bass part synth, but it really struck me about how wide it sounded in the studio on the speakers. And so I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the ways that are cool to you to make things sound wide in the mix, where you're like, I just want this to be bigger than life. And then the flip side to that question is mono still important?
Mono is definitely still important. I think with wide sounds, some of these producers are already giving me wide sounds. So sometimes something might be a little too wide. I'm actually panning that in a little bit. And when you have things that are too wide and you pan one thing in, the main element sounds even more wide because you panned one part in. So now it sticks out even more. I really don't do that much manipulation, but if I do something, you could do something like an MS and add a little top end on just the sides, and it kind of gives you an impression of width without messing too much with if you're going to use like an S1 or like a wave center. And mono makes things kind of hit hard, like a lot of mono kicks and vocals and things like that. It's definitely still important, especially when you're talking about width and you hit the mono button and you hear things disappear. Sometimes a lot of elements are lost when you hit the mono button. So mono button is good for just phase and if you're going too wide. And there was a cool production point with that song that the only mix note I really got was turn up the washer machines. There's washer machines in that song that hit where the kick hits, and they act like that clicky kick part, but they're actually washer machines in the song.
Wow. Was it somebody actually like hitting a washing machine?
No, it sounded like it I don't know if he recorded it that way, but it was just like a washing machine. It was kind of snapping, a hitting sound.
Wow. Fascinating.
And that's in the production. Very, very low, but it does help.
That sort of this is a whole nother podcast, honestly, but it reminds me that I need to just go take that Koala sampling app for the iPhone and just go around recording cool sounds everywhere and just start composing that way, because that's a fun way to it's fun to make records when you start out with some unique and original sounds and just start putting it all together from that.
Yeah, isn't Chad Blake the king of that, like field recording, going out there with like Tom Waits and just like recording all sorts of things just to have it,
Yeah. All right, man. So, dude, I really appreciate you doing this podcast with us. Thank you so much. I have one closing question. This is our hypothetical question I love to ask all the guests. and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back and find young Sam who's like, maybe I should apply for that Bruce Swedien mixing camp, or something like that. And you go back and you say, listen, you're going to go find yourself at a younger age, and you say, listen, I've come back to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to become a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
I think the biggest advice is, always remember your why. Remember why you're in the studio. Remember that you love music no matter what. And I think it's important to understand that you could have love and passion and focus on the things that, make you happy, working on music, collaborating with artists, and taking that and cherishing the moments in the studio while people are making art. It's really an amazing experience to be in the room with musicians while they're making music. It's like you're like watching a painter paint, and we're just there helping capturing the moment. And another thing is have the faith that everything's going to work out. I think there's a lot of trying moments in this business, and you have to kind of run towards the fear, and you are, you're not your mistakes. You make so many, mistakes in the studio, and like, oh man, I chose the wrong microphone, or I could have wrapped up the mic cable differently. You just learn every day and stay humble, stay grounded, and you'll be fine.
That's great.
My advice.
That's great. I love it. Tell the rock stars where they can go find out more about you. What if they're if they just want to follow what you're doing, or what if they're ready to get a great mix of their next future hit record? Where should they seek you out?
My website is samsherbin.com, SHERBIN, and my Instagram is Sam Sherbin Music. And that's really it. Just use those two methods, and you'll find me.
That's awesome. Well, dude, thanks for joining us here. Rockstars, thanks for listening. Much. And I look forward to seeing you in person again.
Thank you.
All right, man. Cheers.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Lewitt, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, Isotope, Spectra 1964, and OWC. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Liz Hulitskaya, and Roberto Oxman de Aragao for additional podcasts and video help. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.